Hey you guys, so I just wanted to check in with you. I'm gonna do a lecture real quick on World War I technology. This is actually what you guys would typically be doing in class. Like everyone would be presenting whatever project it is that you're working on right now. We can't do that because we're not in class, which is okay. But it just means that I'm gonna try to give you a quick rundown of the new like kind of weapons technology that was developed during World War One, and hopefully that information will be enough. And then you guys are going in depth in the project that you actually are working on one of those specific technologies. So that's the plan for today. You guys can listen to the lecture. Make sure you take your notes because the notes um, I'm going to collect when we get back. And that's my way of knowing that you participated in and watched the lecture. So that's the plan. I'm going to go ahead and switch this screen so you guys can see what we're going to be talking about today. So let me just present this. Um, so we're going to focus on kind of like looking at World War One technology, obviously. And I'm going to hopefully at least one of the things I'm talking about today sounds familiar to you. The lecture should probably, I'm going to try to keep it to like 15 minutes, but it might even be shorter. So let's see. Okay, so I kind of broke the different technologies down into different categories. There were so many new things. I have told you guys before that like World War One was where like all of these nations got to test out and try out like their perfected method of killing, pretty much. So you see such a huge increase, and the fact is that both sides have these weapons, and so it makes it really dangerous. That's why you have over 20 million deaths in World War One. So I kind of grouped these ones, these two, and like sort of like high kill rate technology. The reason I did that is because these are responsible, this along with artillery, which remember I told you guys is where both sides like launch artillery at each other. Those were probably responsible for the most deaths during World War One. The bolt action rifle is what it was mass produced. Um, everybody had a bolt action rifle. That well, except for the Russians. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But most everybody that went to the front lines had a bolt action rifle. You guys can see it here. This is the bolt that they're talking about. So you kind of twist it, crank it to load it. You do have to take your hand off of the trigger, which makes it a little bit more difficult to like rapid fire. There were nicer rifles out there at the time that could fire quicker, but this was easy to mass produce. It was a pretty durable rifle. It was also really easy to fire lying down, which they thought was a good thing. They didn't really expect to be standing in trenches. That's something that they kind of deal with later. So that's the bolt action rifle, and then you guys can see you can fix a bayonet onto the front of it, and that's what you would do before you would go what they called over the top to charge your enemy's trench. You're not really so much firing your rifle at that point. You need to have your bayonet ready so that you can kind of fight at close quarters. The machine gun is pretty self-explanatory, really speaks for itself. If you guys look here, is a picture of two men operating a machine gun. You usually had the gunner, and then you had the person that was sort of like helping feed the belt through the system. The machine guns were obviously incredibly lethal. You could fire up to 600 rounds per minute. So if everyone hits, I mean, yeah, you guys know the kind of damage it can do. It really just allowed you to mow down the people that were running at you. And so what happened is on both sides of the trenches, you had people set up these kind of like machine gun, like just like along the trench, these sort of like strongholds. And so, they could kind of cover like as much space as they could. And running up against a machine gun was, well, you guys saw when we looked at that clip of Battle of the Somme, it didn't go very well. usually ever. The only thing is there were issues with like because it fired so quickly. Whoever's doing that project, if you're doing the machine gun, you should kind of like make sure you talk about sort of the issues that happened with like overheating and things like that. Okay, this next group is I refer to as like trench clearing technology because they all kind of work hand in hand to, well, what it sounds like, clear the trenches. So couple of things. Chemical gases were something that were used for the very first time in World War One. They actually weren't even ready at the very start of the war. They were ready actually much later, like 1917, I believe. Whoever's doing that project, you should know the information on that. But chlorine and mustard gas were the two most common ones that were used during World War One. Kind of an unintended impact was that so gases, it's heavier, and so it actually sinks lower, and it sinks kind of, well, and if you have trenches, it's going to go to the lowest place, and so the gas would kind of sink down and sit in the trenches, which made it really dangerous long term because you could have pockets of these gases when you didn't really realize it. The Germans were the first to use it, but there were a lot of things they had to take into account when they were using chemical gases, specifically thinking about the wind. And hopefully, whoever's doing this project will expand on this a little bit. But the wind and the direction that it's blowing plays a big role in if you're going to effectively use those chemical gases or not. So prevention, eventually they start developing gas masks that soldiers could use, but those were not always effective. There is something also in the like acidity of your pee that some soldiers would pee into some sort of cloth that they had and cover their mouth with that so they didn't breathe in the gases. So have fun looking into that one if that's the project you're doing. The Mills bomb. The Mills bomb is named that just because of the person who developed it, but it is a hand grenade. And again, I'm put this in the trench clearing technology part because this is something where if you could get close enough and you could throw a grenade into the trench ahead of you, you're not like running in and jumping into a bunch of people sitting there waiting for you. You've hopefully caused enough damage because of this Mills bomb that you've set off. And obviously, there's issues, that came with these as well. Make sure you mention those. And then the flamethrower was first used by the Germans. There's a lot of fear factor that came with the flamethrower because, it's not like it contributed to like a ton of casualties during World War One. But again, trench clearing technology, it was used to sort of like if you could get the person who was carrying the flamethrower close enough to the trench, you could clear out the trench from a distance. Whoever's doing this project will have to make sure to include how far the flamethrowers could go because that is really important. There was danger to the carrier. A lot of people targeted people when they saw the packs on their back because of the danger of, or if you hit it, it could potentially explode. And so it was dangerous to be the person carrying it, but if you could get in good position, it could be really effective in clearing trenches out. Okay, these technologies I clumped together under like early attempts because they're all things that are super significant, but and are used incredibly effectively in World War II. But in World War I, they weren't like as effectively used, but still so important because this is where they like set the kind of like precedent, sort of like set the tone. They try them out and then they're able to perfect them by World War II. So, still so important, all of them. Airplanes at this point in time mostly were used for scouting. Dog fights is whenever you would come in contact with another enemy plane. you would have what was called a dogfight. And at first, the pilots literally had to pull up their pistol. They had to open the cockpit, pull out their pistol, and try to point blank, like shoot the other pilots as they're flying by. This changes, and I'll talk about another technology that they develop. But the airplanes would kind of sputter and go kind of low to the ground when they're having these dog fights, which is why they were called that, kind of like barking of the engine, I guess. And honestly, there were more training deaths trying to train pilots than actual combat deaths because it was, again, a new technology. It was an early attempt. But by the time World War II comes around, airplanes, I mean, it's huge, the role that they play. Absolutely huge. And so this is really important in terms of working out some of those kinks. Tanks, you guys can see this picture right here. This is actually Little Willie. Little Willie was used by the French and the British in the Battle of the Somme. So we've talked a lot about that battle. It moved about 4 miles per hour, so it was very slow moving. And make sure whoever's doing this project talks about the issues with the exhaust and the armor that was actually used on the tank and the caterpillar treads and some of the issues that come up with it. All I need you guys to know is it was meant to go up and over trenches. Little Willie, the kind of first tanks did get stuck quite a bit, but again, figuring out the kinks in actual warfare allowed them to then, by the time you have World War II, Hitler's Blitzkrieg and his Panzer Division and the Panzer Division of the U.S. I mean, those were so instrumental, and so this allows them to sort of like kind of figure out what the best technology is for these tanks. And then the last one are depth charges. If you are doing this project or if you are just interested, you guys should go to YouTube and look up a video. It's like 50 seconds. It's just like depth charges and like a old World War II submarine or something. It shows them testing out these depth charges, but pretty much it was a defense against submarines because Germans were using submarines, which we'll talk about. Well, both sides were, but Germans were using submarines, and this was like sort of their best attempt to combat it. Ships did not have radar. I would never want to be caught dead on a battleship in the war, knowing that there's submarines lurking about, like ready to torpedo my ship. If there was like no radar, no real way to be like, oh, hey, guess what? There's something lurking in the water that's trying to explode you in the middle of the ocean. But you guys, depth charges, again, it was an early attempt because it was kind of a guessing game. So what you would do is you would it was like a bomb, but you would set it to explode at a certain depth. You didn't want to have it explode right when it hit the water because it's going to blow up your own ship. So you would set it, drop it in the water, sail away, and then it would explode. And you're kind of guessing and or hoping that there might be a submarine nearby that would have been exploded by it. So obviously struggles. It's a guessing game, but still a cool technology. And then the last two that we're going to talk about, so submarines, like I was just saying, let's see, like I was just saying for Germans, they were the ones that used submarines the most effectively. They used their submarines as blockades, patrols, and honestly, a lot of fear factor, right? You just don't know kind of what's lurking in the water. But submarines were used very effectively. Zeppelins, you guys can see this here. They're massive. Like, I don't know if that picture shows the scale. It's like a blimp, but like way bigger. You guys can see down here is where the people are. This entire thing, there's nobody in there. This is where the people are. So it was a really easy target for planes to attack. It wasn't really used super effectively, but the reason it was so significant is because it was so terrifying for your opponent. what would happen is if you fly this Zeppelin and it's like flying your colors and you fly it over a city, it was terrifying for the people who had literally, so many people hadn't even seen an airplane in the sky, let alone to see this flying over your city. So they would drop bombs from it. They would use it for surveillance, but really not super effective in terms of like deaths or casualties or anything like that, but so effective in terms of fear. And honestly, a big part of war is morale. A big part of war is how you feel about your country's success. And nothing kind of kills that more than like this massive flying object that is like in your way or like above your city threatening to drop bombs on you. My husband just got home with some lunch, so sorry for the interruption. Speaking of interruptions, interrupter gear. It's also known as synchronized or sync gear. So pretty much, if you guys can see, once they figured out how to, so this is a picture from World War II because you can see the Nazi symbol here on this plane. But once they figured out how to, or they figured out that they could mount machine guns onto airplanes. But by mounting machine guns onto airplanes, the first people that tried to fire machine guns as opposed to just like a pistol that tried to fire machine guns on the airplanes actually like would shoot off the propellers because it was a disaster. So interrupter gear allows you, it kind of like stalls the airplane propellers. It interrupts them literally, or syncs them with the machine guns so that when you fire, this stalls and you don't blow your own propeller off, which allows machine guns to be mounted on planes, which allows you to, well, more effectively, I guess, like kill anybody on the ground that you're flying over, um, or shoot down another pilot. And then here's information for your World War I technology project that you all should be, better be, either finished with and or working on. It's due tomorrow night. Don't forget. And make sure you took slides on those notes. Make sure you listen to the information because it wasn't all on the slides. And yeah, hope you're having a good week. And we'll probably do another lecture sometime next week. That's all.